can buy our JGBs easily. For example, we're thinking about designing new lines of government bonds, for example, floating rate JGBs. We do have retail JGBs, and we might expand who will be eligible to invest in such retail JGBs, for example, non-financial business institutions as well. We're making efforts to create an environment where JGBs are more easily purchased by enhancing diversity of bond products.
Japanese Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato speaking exclusively to us on Bloomberg. We have more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
As Bloomberg's global financial correspondent, I get to meet the people shaping the way money flows around the world. And I want to bring you with me.
The capitalist system is the best system in the world. There isn't another one that works as well.
I love all these new Wall Streets. Y'all Street, Wall Street South.
Wall Street used to be a place. Now it's more of an idea. I hope you survived the day.
I did. It was a busy day.
Making money isn't about drowning in emotions. It's about understanding what's actually happening. Markets are the best way to glean signal from noise, and that is what we try to do every morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Take a look at how US futures are faring at the moment. We're seeing a little bit of upside there across the board. We're also hearing from President Trump as he's talking about the immigration deportation efforts of his administration. He is expressing his support for ICE, saying they must expand the efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens, saying that ICE must expand their efforts in larger cities. And this, of course, as we saw, rallies particularly when it comes to downtown Los Angeles, but then, of course, also spreading to other major cities as well, protesting the immigration raids that have been expanded under President Trump's second presidency. California at the moment is urging a federal appeals court to maintain that lower court's order to limit the Trump administration's use of National Guard troops in LA to respond to those raids. Sherry, this also comes, of course, as we saw some extraordinary scenes across American cities over the weekend in the No Kings rallies.
It's been a busy weekend. We, of course, were also following the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran that's really rattled markets. You can see right there that oil prices continue to gain ground, but still we're at session lows now after gains that put the WTI price at past $77 a barrel at one point early in the Asian session. The China show is next. This is Bloomberg.
Let's talk about this villa. Very traditional. A lot of
things of the past?
I live my very first independent life in the farmhouse. And I built it by the memory of the farmhouse, the philosophy they believe, yin, yang, 5 elements, the concept of the life, of the happiness. They build this kind of roof, like boat, and man and woman, and bowl of rice. Everyone should be happy if have somewhere to live, something to eat, and someone to love.
So you're defined a lot by your past experiences.
Yeah, actually, I'm a lucky man because not everyone should have the experience of the war and peace, poor and rich, technology progress. I changed during my life, rich by experience.
There's an appreciation for what you have now.
And therefore, peace is the most important thing for today, for Vietnamese, and I think for human being, for the world.
I'm Alex Rodriguez.
And I'm Jason Kelly.
And we're back with more episodes of our show, The Deal.
The theme of this season, On the Road. We're bringing you more behind-the-scenes conversations with the biggest names in sports, business, and culture, like Melody Hobson.
I started to study women's sports like an 11-year-old studies baseball statistics, and I got dangerous in seeing up arrows.
Susie Wolf.
When you're competing, you're not thinking about any fear or any worries of what could happen.
Josh Harris.
You can't do a good deal with a bad person.
Jay Batt.
At the end of the day, there's never been a better time to be a student athlete.
And more. Stay tuned.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question.
Good question. Great question.
I so appreciate that question.
You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions. Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Half an hour away from the Opens in Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Shanghai. You're watching The China Show. I'm Yvonne Mann with David Englert.
Let's get to your top stories today. Oil prices trimming gains while U.S. futures trading little change after Israel launches new missile strikes targeting parts of the Iranian capital.
The conflict in the Middle East set to overshadow trade discussions as President Trump prepares to meet fellow G7 leaders in Canada.
And Beijing's AI ambitions taking a fresh hit as Taiwan announcing restrictions on chip export by TSMC to the likes of Huawei and SMIC. Good Monday morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us right now. Lots to get through in the next 2 hours or so. As far as market reaction, and there just happened to be a weekend in between Friday and Monday. The big difference, as you can see, that things are a lot more stable across risk assets, including, by the way, I should also mention where we are in oil prices, which I'll get to in a moment here. But certainly when you look at equity markets, we are mostly to the upside. We are coming off highs a little bit in some of the benchmarks coming online. You have Taiwan coming online. That's a separate story. We'll get to that in a moment. S&P futures, though, did manage to shake off the early cobwebs. And as you can see now, we're up about 51%, 2s and 10s to the upside. It's a Fed week as well. We'll get to that in a moment here. Very quickly, energy, very much in focus, and gold as well, right? We're about $50 short of that all-time high. We're still higher, but as you can see, almost as I speak, we're retracing almost all of the gains. At one point, we were above 78. We opened above 78 early this morning, about 3 hours back, and as you can see, we're now at about 74.50 going into the rest of the energy complex. Stocks, though, as you can see, still up about 1% within the equity complex. That goes into what we're tracking going into the open today. Shanghai crude up 7% to the upside. Dollar China, as you can see, is 718.90, slightly on the upper end of the recent 3-day range. And we're continuing to track, of course, the weakness in the Hong Kong dollar. We are, as you can see, very, very, very near now at 785, the weekend of the trading band. But yeah, a lot of this comes back to what we're seeing in oil prices, Yvonne.
Yep, that is still where the geopolitical price and premium is really coming back to this market. And certainly what we're seeing still is a very fluid situation. Open hostilities between Israel and Iran have entered a 4th day with no sign of easing, stoking fears of a wider war in the oil-rich region. President Trump, though, thinks it's still possible for both sides to reach a deal.
Mr. President, can you give us a sense of what you're doing to try to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
And John Herskovitz, our Bloomberg editor, is following the latest for us right now. John, what do we need to know?
Well, we've seen our 3rd straight day of fighting. We saw Israel conduct attacks on Tehran, a gas field, and vow to continue its attacks to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Iran has retaliated with missiles and drone strikes, some of which have hit civilian populations in Israel, and neither side is shown any signs of willing to back down. So both sides are keeping up. With Israel, they have shown that they have air superiority. A lot of the air defenses in Iran, in certain areas, appear to be weakened. And for Iran, they're doing what they can to attack. So the fighting is going on, and of course this is creating worries of a wider war in markets. Oil prices are going up. There has been no signs of de-escalation, which is just creating worries in markets and around the world.
And those talks were canceled in Oman on Sunday as well, John. In terms of the U.S., where does the Trump administration and the U.S. stand in all this right now?
Sure. As we saw in the clip, the Trump administration is saying that the deal could be reached. There may be a need for more fighting until that can happen. The U.S. has denied involvement in helping Israel, but Trump didn't rule it out, especially with going after Iran's nuclear facilities. So we have this, and we have Trump heading to the G7 in Canada, where there's going to be more disagreement, discussion about what goes next with this. The worries are of whether there'll be U.S. involvement in this, whether Iran will target U.S. military assets in the region, something that they've indicated that they could do, and whether this would mean U.S. involvement. So we have a lot of things coming from Trump. We have a lot of worries for the U.S., and we have the G7 going on, where this will be a main topic of discussion, and we may see disagreement. We may see some cooperation. There are various points of view that are going to be considered as Trump goes to the talks in Canada.
John, thank you. John Herskovitz there, our Bloomberg editor with the latest. Let's bring in Bilahari Kausikan, a distinguished fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. He's also a former permanent secretary of Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. It seems like there's no sign of easing right now between the two sides. Do you see any sort of reason or anywhere in the time frame right now where the two sides can de-escalate from here?
I don't think either side wants to de-escalate right now. They will continue for some weeks. Israel is determined, if not to completely eliminate Iran's nuclear capability, to delay, degrade it, and doing so by not just going after the nuclear facilities, but by destroying large numbers of the Iranian leadership, senior leadership, destroying its oil infrastructure, its power grid, so that, even if the centrifuges are not destroyed, they become meaningless. On the other hand, Iran is in a terrible dilemma. It has already been exposed as completely ineffectual during the Gaza war. Its so-called axis of resistance has fallen apart. Israel has achieved air dominance over Iran. It has demonstrated that the Iranian system is totally penetrated by Israeli intelligence. And this has weakened the regime, and it cannot afford to appear even weaker. Yet its options are limited. What can it do? It has fired hundreds of missiles, ballistic missiles at Israel. It has caused some physical damage, but relatively few casualties and fewer fatalities. Israel air missile defense system seems to have stopped about 90% or so of Iranian missiles. So I don't think either side is ready to stop yet.
Right. I guess I want to get a sense to what extent the ability of Iran to retaliate has been handicapped by, to your point, right, ineffective already before the last 4 days or so, perhaps even more so because of all the attacks over the weekend. And I now wonder whether or not, inevitably, this will be a de-escalation because Iran can't respond in kind.
Well, look, Iran's conventional defenses have been exposed as ineffectual even during the Gaza war, before the last 4 days. And the last 3 or 4 days have further degraded it. I think I've read somewhere that Iran has 3,000 plus ballistic missiles, and maybe a third or more of that has been destroyed or expended. So they can go on for a little while. They cannot afford to surrender without a fight. Otherwise, the regime is at risk. But Israel can afford to go on much longer. And to Israel, Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon or getting close to acquiring a nuclear weapon is an existential threat that cannot be tolerated. And that is also an existential threat, not just to Israel, but to the Sunni Arab monarchies. So I think this war is going to go on for some time more until Iran's capabilities are even further degraded, even if not totally eliminated.
Bilahari, at what point do you think this drags the U.S. into this conflict right now? What role do you see the U.S. playing?
Well, I think there are two scenarios, right? One, if the Iranians, in desperation or out of foolishness or miscalculation, start to attack U.S. assets. President Donald Trump has already promised or threatened a response like nobody has ever seen before. Now, that's one scenario if Iran makes a mistake and attacks U.S. assets, all right? Then U.S. will join Israel in attacking Iran. The other scenario is every war must end. And I think this will end with a Hobson's choice for Iran. Do I surrender to Israel or do I surrender to the U.S., which is least acceptable? So I think President Trump is not completely wrong when he says there is possibly a role for diplomacy, but they will have to fight it out for a bit longer until Iran faces this Hobson's choice.
Bilahari, two major things are, let's call it tail risks for markets. They're worrying about two things. One is this escalates beyond the region, that's number one. And number two, within the region, if we do see a closure at the Strait of Hormuz, do you see any scenario where we get to those two?
I don't think it's going to escalate beyond the region. Right? This is a regional war. It will stay a regional war. Who are Iran's extra-regional allies? Russia is hands full in Ukraine. China's strategic or political role in the Middle East is largely performative. They are in no position to substantively help Iran. It could, however, escalate within the region if Iran is foolish enough to attack either American assets or Saudi energy infrastructure. And that would include trying to close the Strait of Hormuz. That will immediately bring the US into the equation, I think, as well as other Western countries. And I don't think Iran, and that will even worsen Iran's situation, I don't think they are that foolish. Not yet. They are not desperate enough yet, and they are not foolish enough, I think. So I think the risk of it escalating beyond the Middle East is practically non-existent. The risk of it spreading within the Middle East is not zero, but right now I think the probability is not high either, unless Iran gets very desperate or totally miscalculates again.
Bilahari, thank you so much for the time. Sir Bilahari Kausakan there, former Singaporean diplomat. He's also a distinguished fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. Cutting down to the open of trade, 18 minutes away. Equities are slightly to the upside. Oil is still up, way off highs of the day. Dollar is mixed. We're stable going into the Monday session. 17 minutes away. This is the China Show.
up-to-the-minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Cape Town, South Africa, and this is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live 2 times a day, every trading day. Balance of Power at 1 and 5 Eastern, only on Bloomberg. Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
The new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Every business day at 2 p.m. Eastern, only on Bloomberg. Bloomberg loves earnings.
I know it's like your Super Bowl, right?
I can't wait. It's like opening presents in the morning.
All right, it will be exciting.
Nobody covers earnings like Bloomberg.
Good morning. We are looking at live pictures out of Tel Aviv here this morning, where we are actually seeing from the Israeli Defense Forces a confirmation that identified missiles were launched from Iran towards Israel. That was coming through about 7 minutes ago. And then state TV in just the last seconds here saying that Iran has fired a new wave of missiles at Israel. So we are seeing that retaliation early this morning there in Israel from the Iranians. And certainly there has been a lot of questions of how long of a protracted war could we see between the two sides this morning, Dave?
Yeah, just gone past 4:15 in the morning, as you can see there in Israel. And I think if you're just joining us right now, a couple of seconds ago, the live shot that you saw actually did manage to capture what looked to be some of those missiles that we just talked about there. So this is a developing story still. As it pertains to markets, more stable, yet you get a sense that we're still a bad headline away from, again, this picking up a little bit even further. Jeff Ung joins us right now, head of Asia Macro Strategies, SMBC. Jeff, thank you for joining us today. Lots of moving parts. We can get to what's on the agenda. What we know is on the agenda this week in a moment. We have the Fed, you have the BOJ. I know you guys expect still a weaker dollar ahead, but just give us a sense of how what's taking place in the Middle East is to some extent complicating the matters for markets at this point in time, Jeff.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think while we are expecting a weaker dollar that will come in over the coming weeks and months, I think this current geopolitical development is complicating matters. So we are likely to see the dollar perhaps see some near-term rebound against some of the other currencies, for example, the euro. And I think there could be also a flight to safety. So some of the safe haven currencies could continue to benefit in the light of this geopolitical development. Near-term implication is that there could be higher energy prices. So that may spark a wave of commodity reflation, because so far what we've seen for now is that food and energy inflation has been relatively low over the past few months, and right now there could be some potential rebound if the energy prices stay high for some time. So that could cause some complication into currency developments.
How long-lasting do you think these moves are going to be, Jeff? I mean, that certainly is a big question. But this is coming at a time when we are seeing equity markets quite resilient to a lot of the trade headlines here. But how do the prospect of more geopolitical uncertainty, how does that lead to, and where does that leave risk assets moving forward?
Sure. I think so far the markets are still relatively comfortable that the geopolitical conflict could be limited. But I think as the previous speaker has also correctly identified, there could be some potential risk of some strategic miscalculation, or the conflict can also be extended. So I think once markets start to price in this conflict being extended, or some strategic miscalculation, or you can see some increases in the commodity prices, I think that could cause markets to then take more weight into what has been happening recently, and I think that could cause more uncertainty in markets going forward.
Jeff, what does it mean for demand for havens? And maybe just a second follow-up to that would be, Treasuries, U.S. Treasuries specifically, haven't really acted as havens of late. Do you think Treasuries will remain low on the list of havens for markets? And what does it mean, I guess, to the other point I was making on gold, for example?
Yes, certainly. I think some of the safe haven currencies that we think that could do quite well will include, I think, the Swiss franc, gold, I think, has been traditionally a safe haven asset as well. And I think in the region, the Sing dollar could be also performing relatively well in the light of this current development. Now, U.S. Treasuries, turning to that topic, I think there's still some concerns about the credit quality and the long-term credit worthiness, perhaps coming from the big beautiful bill itself, and perhaps the long-term implications of higher debt ratios in the US, and how that may weigh into some of the rating agencies going forward. So I would anticipate that the outlook for the US Treasuries will be a bit more complicated. It could also be determined by perhaps the next Fed potential rate cut, which we think could happen as early as September, or maybe it could be delayed, or it could also depend on other factors like the credit worthiness and the credit risk.
And the big sort of headline event, apart from what we're seeing right now in Israel and Iran, Jeff, is the Fed. And bring it back to where markets are really looking at. I mean, obviously there's been pressure from President Trump for Jay Powell to cut rates, but it looks like they might be holding steady for this meeting. What are you looking out for in this one in particular?
For this coming meeting, we don't expect the Fed to cut. I think they will likely remain in a wait and watch mode. I think what we are watching out for is the summary of economic projections, whether there are any changes, because what we have seen over the past few months is that PCE has been coming within or below expectations, so there could be some adjustments lower, even with the geopolitical situation still being pretty fluid. But I think the policymakers may have taken the past few months into account, and perhaps the trend going forward that could cause the numbers to be adjusted. And I think that may set the stage for rate cuts later this year, especially if inflation doesn't rebound. And I think if the situation is appropriate, and perhaps as the Fed considers the real indices, the economic data, if there's any deterioration to retail sales data or industrial production that's out later this week or in the coming few months, then there could be more cases for rate cuts.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Jeff Ng there, head of Asia macro strategy at SMBC. As we were talking, we're still looking at those live pictures out of Tel Aviv, where you are actually seeing what has been reported, right? Missiles that have launched from Iran to Israel there. We're starting to track kind of what we could hear from world leaders. Ursula von der Leyen has been talking to and mentioned that she did speak with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, today. And they mentioned sanctions are critical when it comes to pressuring Russia. But they've already been talking a little little bit more about what this means in the Middle East here. But yes, in the last few minutes, we have heard from state TV that Iran has fired a new wave of missiles at Israel.
Yeah, and while that's taking place, the move across these markets right now, following the extreme moves on Friday, has really been one that's priced out ever so slowly, risk premia, going into the thick of Monday right now. So just case in point is oil, where that focus has very much been centered. Oil prices are now trading at about session lows, still slightly higher for the day. We'll continue to keep on top, of course, of literally developing story out of the Middle East. Plenty more ahead. This is the China Show.
Bloomberg launches our inaugural 25 African Startups to Watch list.
About 2.5 years ago, we created a solution. We are able to generate refrigeration using the sun and water. We're able to store energy in the form of ice, as opposed to storing energy in the form of lithium batteries. We're integrated in every refrigerator a pay-as-you-go technology, allowing individuals and small businesses to be able to pay as low as $10 to own a refrigerator.
Uncover is a women's wellness brand that is specifically made for women of color. It's based in Africa, which is the most underserved beauty market in the world. We are making Africa a priority and not an afterthought. We believe that the population on this continent deserves to be formulated for, heard, and we are giving this consumer a voice.
What is going to be the consequence for U.S. markets? We are basically deep in the European earnings season.
Take a look at how we're faring when it comes to Asian markets.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jumana Versace in Doha, Qatar, and this is Bloomberg.
In terms of your agenda here today, of course, we're still waiting for that data dump for May in China. That is going to be our top story there at the top of the hour. And we're still looking for maybe things to tread water, right? No trade boost yet, according to Bloomberg Economics on the data here today. New home prices come out in just about 6 minutes' time. The president is in Kazakhstan, so we're watching what he says there. But really, it's all focused on the Middle East right now, right? So crude, energy stocks very much in focus. SMIC, well, we saw that Taiwan move there to restrict curbs, or at least expand those curbs on Huawei and SMIC. So we're watching some of the domestic players here today. And of course, Hong Kong dollar weakness is still a lingering theme here too, Dave.
Yeah, we're a few ticks away from the weak end of the trading band. Coming through as well is U.S. futures, just to give you a sense of the mood music across these markets going into the open today. So U.S. futures are doing this. And of course, we also did get the credit numbers on Friday. Just about a miss almost across the board. You have new local currency loans. You have aggregate financing, which puts everything together. And of course, money supply coming in below 8%. That's M2 specifically. Right. U.S. futures, European futures were down actually last we checked. So still some weakness. And of course, when you look at the markets here in Hong Kong, we are about half 1% to the downside. Yvonne was talking about SMIC, which should be coming up on your screen shortly towards the bottom there on the back of news coming out of Taiwan on the weekend. Do we have that? Can we find that, please, if we can? We're down 1% on SMIC on Monday. Right, U.S. futures, there we go. Thank you so much, finally. Okay, and Brent crude is still looking at some gains right now. Fix uneventful. So generally a mood of risk off going into the opening session today here.
Yep, so stocks to watch. We talked about the oil stocks in particular, where we're focusing on where we're seeing. Now, we talked about energy prices right now. We've kind of stabilized a little bit in the Asia session here, but of course we're watching very closely. Some of the likes of Sinopec and CNOOC are still up this morning. PetroChina and China Oil Services are up some 2%. So certainly there is still some movement in price action across some of these energy players here today. And we're also watching the likes of the biotech stocks, because there's been a lot of talk about this renaissance that we're seeing there as well. Biotech, Wuxi Biologics, I should say, there's going to be a share placement there today at 26.60 Hong Kong dollars each. So we're watching very closely that stock in particular, Dave.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, watch this. Live TV, folks, coming up very shortly. Here we go. Going into the open today, so before we get the housing numbers coming through, the activity numbers coming through, this one actually updates in a couple of minutes or so. So currently 23 straight months of month-on-month declines. We'll see what this looks like, including the open. That's coming up next. You're watching The China Show.
A multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg.
Didn't really think I had a problem.
I would isolate, self-medicate.
Like 48.5 million Americans, they didn't choose addiction. Go to shatterproof.org/findtreatment. Watch the film No More Secrets and find out how you can get help. That's shatterproof.org/findtreatment.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI to entertainment.
And from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right, we're going into the opening bell today, but before we look at markets here, just an update of what's the latest out of Israel and Iran, where it's just gone past, at least in Israel, 9:30 in the morning here. So we do understand, based on state TV from Iran and also the IDF, that missiles have been launched from Iran towards Israel. If you're just joining us right now, we did show you live pictures about 4:15 in the morning, where you did catch a glimpse of several what looked to be those missiles there, which Iran state TV is describing as more crushing than before. We'll keep on top of the story, but in the meantime, we're also looking at the open here today, Yvonne.
Yeah, the key question is, how far is Iran going to take this against Israel to a point that it might drag the U.S. into this war and jeopardize the relationships and these new improved relations with some of the Gulf states? That's the key question here. But we'll see how, what they're targeting at the moment when it comes to these missiles that we just saw in just the last couple of minutes. But it certainly continues to be a fourth day of uncertainty geopolitically here. Take a look at the open here in China. We're still waiting for that data dump right at the the top of the hour. New home prices coming through any second now. We'll get you the latest on that front. But the data, well, we'll see if it actually moves markets here today. It seems to be very headline driven, what we're seeing in Iran and Israel here at the moment. But we're seeing onshore markets are slightly seeing some pressure here this morning. Key to watch is still Shanghai crude. Playing that catch up here, we're seeing a pop of 5% in Shanghai, and those futures are concerned. And already, though, if you take a look at WTI and Brent, we are off some of the initial sort of peaks there already that we've seen in the last 48, 72 hours. So at least right now, things have stabilized a little bit when it comes to the crude price. Hong Kong is doing this. More downside here when it comes to tech this morning. We're down about 0.9%. 8 shares are off, right? But we're still sort of talking about bull market territory in that benchmark. But it seems like tech certainly is getting hit here this morning. So risk assets still very much in the forefront and getting that pressure. Alibaba down some 1%. Meituan down 1.5% or so right now. So that's going to be key to watch. In terms of movers, it's really going to be the oil majors and the like here. We're watching very closely what happens in the energy space here. But Dave, I believe you have those new home price data coming out in your terminal right now.
Yeah, not very encouraging. Let me start off with new home prices. This is for the month of May here. So we're looking at negative 0.22%. That's month on month. So it is, well, not just a faster drop than April. That's number one context. The other one is when you take it back all the way this year, that should be at 0.22%, the fastest drop month on month across the board. That's 70 cities. Of course, there's nuance and context within that data set. Fastest drop in 2025. Used home prices are down 0.5%. Also, Yvonne, faster than the drop that we saw for the month of April. Again, May data, new home prices down 0.22%. Used home prices down 0.5%. We're seeing a little bit of strength coming through in the Chinese currency. We'll unpack the story, of course, later on with more economic analysis coming out of mainland China. But before that, back to oil, Yvonne.
Yeah, it seems like we haven't seen that bottom, right, in the property market in China just yet. But you take a look at how oil, and really it's the oil majors that we're seeing in China, and now that is basically following through what we're seeing for most of some of the regional energy players here today. We are seeing a little bit of upside in some of these stocks here, but really we're going to broaden it out and really talk about what's at stake here right now, because the biggest fear in the oil market right now is this map we're about to show you, right? Everyone's talking about the Strait of Hormuz and the potential blockage of this area. Now, this is what we're talking about, right? Just really close to where Iran is. And this is this very narrow pathway, but we're talking about 1/5 of the world's oil output a day goes through this area. So certainly this is what people are most concerned about, right? Obviously right now, it still seems to be the most bearish, most extreme case if Iran decides to block this area. And if they proceed to do so, though, the big concern is that oil prices are going to hit above $100 here right now. And you're seeing that angst in some of the options markets, that spread between WTI and Brent as well. And you're also seeing it in what we're seeing in WTI implied risk premium. You look at what we saw just last week, that premium was about $6 in just 1 week. We've seen that surge about $5 here, $11.50 here. Keep in mind, though, let's put into context, the average that you're seeing from 2016 to recently 2025 has been around 8.65. So we are actually above that average here right now. But when you take a look at what the peak was back in March 2022, so shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, that peak was at $58. So we're far, far, far from those levels. But Bloomberg Intelligence's Henry Fung had a pretty interesting take on this, Dave, right? Yeah. If we actually reach those peak levels or even get close to what we saw back in 2022, we could be seeing WTI back to levels at 125, I believe, is his forecast based on a fair value of $67. So basically against this backdrop, he's saying, look, oil prices could stay elevated for the short term, and that's even despite if OPEC Plus continues to raise output in August.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we do get to a scenario where we do see that premium added on top of the spot price and even the futures curve, right? I don't think oil at 130 is the thing we need to be worrying about in that kind of scenario. I think the other guest we had earlier on at the top of the show just mentioned that as well, right? In a scenario where we do see the Strait of Hormuz closed, that's when they think the U.S. steps in, because that becomes a little bit too disruptive right now. Let's get a sense right now of commodities themselves. Daniel Hines, Senior Commodity Strategist at ANZ, joining us right now. Daniel, I mean, it's one of those things where we're giving out scenarios, but we're not sure, of course, if we do get to those scenarios. But just help us understand where your head is right now when you look at the oil price.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the situation for the oil market has clearly changed. So I get a sense, certainly over the last 18 months, that the risks that the market was applying to supply disruptions was diminishing, and that's been an actual trend over the past 20 or 30 years. Really, we've seen these major geopolitical events have less of an impact over a shorter period of time, certainly in relation to oil prices. Considering, I suppose, the lack of real supply disruptions that we've seen. So while clearly, the risks are suddenly elevated, and certainly there are a lot of, as you said, scenarios that could potentially play out here in the shorter term, my overriding sort of feeling is that, yes, we'll see a spike, but I think the environment is a lot different to what we've seen even sort of 2 or 3 years ago, and I suspect the market can handle it a little bit better this time around. So for me, that risk of $100 plus in oil is certainly a lot lower than maybe what we would have been facing even a few years ago.
So you think maybe $100 oil unlikely, but you mentioned it's hard for us to get back to $60. Is that the sort of range that we're looking at right now, Daniel?
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly been the market hasn't really been applying any sort of significant geopolitical risk premium, I think, over the past 6, maybe even 12 months. And, this obviously raises the risk. And clearly, as we said, there's scenarios playing out where we could see some disruptions to the oil market. So there has to be some sort of risk premium applied. But and I think, look, they've been a little bit lax in I suppose, assessing those risks around Israel and Iran. So I think this latest sort of event, will jolt them back into reality. And I suspect going forward, we're going to see a sizable risk premium priced into the market. So for me, that certainly puts away, I suppose, the risk of that sub $60 that we were actually forecasting not that long ago. Where it ends up, I suppose, in the shorter term will be driven by what Iran does essentially around this latest conflict.
Yeah, Daniel, so clearly there needs to be some risk premium. Now, we don't know, depending on what happens, certainly with developments on the ground, but what would be, Daniel, would you say, what would be the tail risks that markets need to consider now that were crazy thought just this time last week?
Well, I clearly believe there's now risks that Iran's regime could topple. If Israel is determined to drive that as a focus, then we could see oil severely disrupted as a result of that. So that would clearly be a worst case scenario, and under that sort of proviso, I suspect you'd see Iran really retaliate aggressively without any thought, I suppose, to the consequences, and that brings into play a whole lot of oil, broadly across the region. So that while limited sort of possibility, clearly would present a pretty sizable risk to oil prices pushing above that $100 a barrel.
Daniel, we got about 20 seconds left. Gold prices at a record. We're above 3,400 now. Where to next for gold?
Oh, look, I think the risk or haven buying, essentially, that we'll see emerge from this will replace some of that buying that had been sort of subdued a little bit due to easing trade tensions. So I do think we'll see record highs in oil. This will really rattle the market, and they'll really be looking for some safe haven assets, and gold fits that bill perfectly.
Daniel, thank you so much. Daniel Hines, Senior Commodity Strategist at ANZ, with the latest there on his take and the sort of the gaming out of scenarios that we need to consider at this point in time, given just the fluidity of the situation over in the Middle East. Now, part and parcel to the story, of course, is really what the U.S. says and what they eventually will do. You have President Trump. He's headed to Canada. There's a G7 summit there, world leaders. Certainly this conflict in the Middle East looks set to overshadow hopes for progress on the separate story that we haven't even gotten to today, which is the trade conversation. David Gura, our Bloomberg correspondent, joins us, in fact, right now in Alberta for us to give us a preview of what to expect this week. David, we're all yours. What are you tracking there?
Well, certainly this conflict in the Middle East is casting a huge shadow over this agenda. Not the official agenda, but it's what everyone here is talking about. And we've seen as world leaders have made their way to Canada, conversations among them, statements issued about this conflict. And we have yet to see sort of if there's going to be any kind of cohesive statement among these G7 nations and other leaders, a unified message about that conflict in the Middle East. So we'll look for that. But I should say that would not be in keeping with what we were said to expect here going into this summit. Everyone here remembers what happened in 2018. The last time the G7 was in Canada, Donald Trump ripped up the communique and left in a fit of pique and had a lot of criticism for then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Nobody wants that to happen this time around. So there's a lot of kind of delicate dancing in terms of what is on that agenda, what folks are talking about. I should say Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, is speaking right now, and she said this summit's going to be defined by two things, geoeconomics and geopolitics. So trade is something else that's, again, not on the official agenda, but a huge focus of everyone who's here. And there was some expectation before things erupted in the Middle East that we could see some agreements between the U.S. and other trading partners come out of this summit. Maybe not concrete, detailed deals, but kind of frameworks for them like we saw with the U.S. and the U.K. I should say expectations for that have been scaled back dramatically, but the EU's head of trade policy is here on the ground in Kananaskis, in Canada, ahead of this summit. So those conversations, I suspect, will continue among these world leaders on the sidelines.
Yeah, you mentioned there's a lot of things that could happen. Tell us where, it's interesting even just location of where this G7 is in Banff, a beautiful backdrop behind you, but tell us a bit more the significance of that, because it seems like, they wanted to host somewhere with a bit of a more neutral ground in case of what happens.
So the first thing you have to understand is just how wide this geography is. So there are parts of this that are taking place in Calgary. That's more than an hour from here. Kananaskis is where the world leaders are gathered at a very small resort in a very hard to get to place. And then there's more happening where I am in Banff. But it's that central point in Kananaskis that's so critical here, because you have this small group of world leaders, yes, those of the G7, but other nations as well, that Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, has invited to attend here, including Narendra Modi. They think that in that setting, in that small group, they can have the kind of frank conversations that will lead them to come to some kind of agreement on various issues. Again, I go back to what I said about that joint communique. No expectation here that these 7 nations are going to emerge from this summit with kind of a unified statement on all of these fronts. There's just too much disagreement. But maybe the thinking goes, if they're in this very remote, small place, in a very elegant hotel for a number of days, they'll be able to have those conversations on the sidelines. That will kind of improve the level of comedy among these nations. We'll see if that happens, but that's certainly the hope and the expectation of Canada's fairly new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who really wants this to go off without a hitch.
David, great to have you back on Asia Programming there. David Gura, a Bloomberg correspondent, joining us there live from Banff, Canada. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
You missed it on the opening trade.
What trade does is it meets a consumer demand. Consumer demand is not weakening. China supplies a little over 30% of what we eat, wear, and consume. That's unlikely to change anytime soon. I think that supply will find new homes potentially, but our reliance as a global economy on Chinese manufacturing is unlikely to change fundamentally anytime soon.
Don't miss the opening trade live every weekday.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
Welcome back. We're looking at Chinese chip stocks and certainly one eye on focus there. You had over the weekend Taiwan updating this list, imposing export controls, and that list now includes Huawei and SMIC. Now that means that tech giants will be further restricted from accessing the tools needed or necessary to build AI semiconductors. For what this means, what was announced over the weekend, our tech correspondent, of course, Belle is with us right now to take us through another blow here for China's tech ambitions.
Yeah, well, I mean, those two names that you mentioned, Huawei and SMIC, they're really at the center of China's efforts to try and build out its semiconductor ecosystem. So this is definitely something that's a damaging move. But essentially, just to give the context here, Taiwan maintains a so-called strategic high-tech commodities list. And so on that list, it has names or entities or groups that are considered or could be considered bad actors. So names like Al-Qaeda, for instance, or the Taliban. That now has been expanded to more than 600 names, and over the weekend SMIC and Huawei were included on it, plus some of their subsidiaries. So what that means is if you're a Taiwanese semiconductor company or any Taiwanese company essentially that's looking to sell to these names, you're now going to ask or need to ask for government approval, and really these names have been blacklisted in essence. So it's been very damaging, especially for a name like Huawei, for instance, because back in 2023 we were reporting at Bloomberg how they were managing to find these workarounds to still access this technology. Be interesting to see if this move actually has the intended effect of cutting them off.
And it's a bit unprecedented, right? Because before we've seen blanket bans on certain equipment, but this is actually names of Chinese companies that are being included in this list.
Yeah, so this is a real first for Taiwan, exactly. They had the blanket bans, now they're actually targeting or going after these specific names themselves or these companies. I think it's interesting to sort of note the dynamics of this as well, because you've got not only rising tensions between Taipei and Beijing, and you saw Lai Ching-te, for instance, the Taiwanese president this year, coming out and saying that China was a foreign hostile force for the first time ever, looking at these different measures to try and counter the infiltration efforts. But at the same time, you've also got the negotiations ongoing between Taipei and Washington. And we know that Taiwan wants to put the best foot forward with the US. It's interesting to note sort of the timing of that, given these negotiations are ongoing. But yes, as we said, Taiwan adding Huawei and SMIC to its entity list, so going to be restricting those local companies in Taiwan from shipping to them without government approval.
All right, Belle, thank you. Annabelle Drew is there with the latest on that. And of course, we're watching a New World as well. It's a pretty crucial day for the property developer. They need to pay more than $5 million in interest that's due on a dollar bond, and a default can be triggered if the payments are not made within 14 days. For more, let's get to our China correspondent, Min Min Lo, with the details and how concerned investors should be on this.
Yeah, I think they're pretty worried right now because just last month, New World had announced that they were deferring payments for 4 perpetual bonds that were due this month. And for the bond payment that is due today, that's for a regular bond that doesn't have the option to defer payment. So failure to pay within that 14 days grace period could trigger a default. And this is a 5.88% dollar bond. It's now trading at about 65 cents on the dollar, which is pretty distressed. If it's below 70 cents, we consider it distressed. And the company, the good news is that over the weekend, it's managed to raise some funds by selling 138 apartments within a few hours by selling them at a discount. And New World is also in talks with banks. They have been for many months. They're trying to close this refinancing deal with over 50 banks. They've gotten written commitments for about 78% of their target for now. So that's critical to watch. If they are able to secure that refinancing agreement, that will be critical for their short and mid-term horizon in terms of their ability to pay back their interests.
And does this remain mostly still a New World story, or is this broader sort of ills across the sort of Hong Kong property sector?
Yeah, actually, the Hong Kong property sector now is getting a tailwind from the lower interest rates because HIBOR is now the lowest in 3 years. And according to Bloomberg Intelligence, if mortgage rates fall below 2%, it could spark this rebound in home sales to a 6-year high. But of course, the property market has not been doing well for some time. There is still a high level of inventory. There is the trade tensions that could cause uncertainty, caused people to hold back on investing in property. But Bloomberg Intelligence says that still it's more important for developers to be able to borrow than to deleverage at this point, and at least that lower interest rates could provide a cheaper funding alternative to the dollar bond market.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, transactions have gone up on the weekend, but at a discounted rate, of course. They're minimum low. Thank you so much, our China correspondent there. A brief look at what is moving and consistent really across these markets is gold and the haven play there. You have spot, you have futures, and we're about $50-$60 and an all-time high on spot. And the way this is actually showing up in Chinese equity markets is the next board coming up on your screens, whether the miners themselves or the jewelers selling the actual bling, Chow Tai Fook, Look Fook, and the miners on your screens. Plenty more ahead. This is the China Show.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's Chief Future Officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders. CFO Pascal Desroches has played a key role in restructuring AT&T, reducing debt and refocusing the business. Now his steady approach has the company primed for growth.
I'm a believer you try to make progress on big problems every day, and ultimately you'll look back and say, hey, you've come a long way.
Watch Chief Future Officer Wednesday on Bloomberg. U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
You're looking at earlier pictures that we saw in Tel Aviv there, where the state TV had talked about and reported about Iran launching these missiles in Israel overnight there. As we enter a fourth day of conflict between the two countries, no sign of easing just yet. And now the fear is that this could be stoking into a wider war in the oil-rich region here. The conflict has already resulted in significant casualties and damage. So far, we've heard 224 people killed in Iran, 14 people dead, and around 400 injured in Israel. That's according to government reports, Dave.
And we'll keep on top of the story. I mean, in case you're just joining us right now, these pictures that we're showing you right now, in fact, just taking place in the last 45 minutes or so. So these are fairly fresh and underscores the developing nature of the story at the time of the day where it's barely, we're almost just only at 5 in the morning there, Monday in Israel, right, in Tel Aviv specifically. Right, let's have a look at, well, the market iteration of this show. We showed you gold, we talked about oil at length, we're looking at some of the defense stocks related across the region, and as you can see, these are some of the South Korean names that are seeing some upside, in some cases substantial upside in Hanwha Systems, up about 20% on the back of the storyline that underscores what is taking place over there in the Middle East. Very quickly, let's flip the page, please, and have a look at rare earth stocks in focus as well, and we are seeing a little bit of gains there as far as that is concerned. And again, this takes it back to the trade negotiations taking place, and certainly the headline here is that we have yet to see, of course, that being addressed. That's according to reporting out of Reuters. The broader read across equity markets about 25 minutes into the session here is we're stable to slightly lower. Currency markets are relatively well behaved. Energy markets are still seeing some upside, although I think the point we want to make is that the peak that we had in Brent, for example, that we hit back on Friday is about still quite some distance away from current levels, $3 or $4 a barrel away from that point in time.
Yeah, China activity data is coming up. That's the next thing to watch here for these markets. And after we saw in the new home prices there, those drops faster than the previous month, we'll see what the rest of May shows for the economy. BNP Paribas chief economist Jacqueline Rong will join us next.
Are you worried about your borders because of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine? Is that something you worry about in terms of the impact of Russia-Ukraine on your investment appetite for things like that?
I'm not worried about Russia invading Norway anytime soon. We are a member of NATO. We do border to Russia, but now, since Finland and Sweden joined NATO, we feel stronger than before.
So today, what would you say your biggest investment concerns are? You're running $1.7 trillion fund. For the average person not managing that much money, what should they be worrying about, and what are you worrying about?
No, I think you've got two things. One, you have the known unknowns, right? So, and there at the top of my list would be two things. One is inflation, because I think there is an argument in a tight labor market when you potentially decline the supply or reduce the supply of labor. In the US, you put on tariffs. These things can be inflationary, and there could be a moment where, given the high level of government debt, that the investors suddenly decide, you know what, we want a much higher coupon to lend to, to governments, and so you could see a step up in interest rates, which could be negative for financial markets. Then, of course, all the AI-related stocks. The epicenter here is Taiwan, so you need to watch that. The thing that really scares us when it happens is the unexpected. In
case you missed it on Bloomberg Insight.
I just think there's a chance that you'll have stagflation. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't want the reader to say he's predicting. I'm not. But we have to be prepared for something like that. I think the global fiscal deficits are inflationary. I think the remilitarization of the world is inflationary. The restructuring of trade is inflationary. And this is not all an American thing. With all those things taking place, yeah, you may be surprised.
I spoke to Jamie Dimon. He says that we should actually prepare for stagflation. How do you square that?
I think there's no question that the shock of tariffs are stagflationary. The question is going to be ultimately how high do they settle at? Right now they're at a very high level, highest in 100 years. And how long a period both is this uncertain environment and how long are the tariffs going to last? And the question now is the magnitude of the stagflationary impulse, and we just don't know yet.
Don't miss Bloomberg Insight live weekdays.
Trading connection lost.
Our global headquarters in New York, I'm Danny Berger. Welcome to Bloomberg Brief. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Stephen Engel at the Forbidden City in Beijing, and this is Bloomberg.
Good morning. Welcome back to the show. We're going into the second hour of the China show. In a couple of seconds, we'll be getting the activity numbers for the month of May. Before we get to that, the backdrop here is when you just look at data since Friday, credit numbers coming in slightly below expectations almost across the board, not completely, and in about 30 minutes back, the home price numbers coming through as well, showing that the economy, while is stable, is not showing strong signs of a recovery just yet.
Yep, and the activity data is going to be coming through any second now. Bloomberg Economics thinks you might not see any sort of benefit from this trade truce just yet in these numbers, that this might take a bit longer to really show up when it comes to production and the like here. So certainly that's the thing to watch here. Of course, we're still focusing on the geopolitics and what we're seeing in Iran and Israel, but here you go.
There we go.
The latest when it comes to the activity in May. Oh, retail sales, Dave, a bit of a surprise, 6.4%. This is beating expectations and rising further than what we saw the prior month as well. Industrial production, that is a miss, though, 5.8%. The economists were expecting a 6% print here. What else are you seeing here right now?
Well, the retail sales stands out immediately. This looks to be an absolute blowout number to the upside here. So 6.4% should take this back all the way a couple of years as far as the fastest pace of growth for retail sales. Just to underscore also how far above the expectations this was, the very top end of forecast coming in from Capital Economics at 5.5%. So 6.4 is almost a full percentage point above the very top end. But as Yvonne is pointing out, the rest of the data set largely underwhelming, underscore perhaps the need perhaps of either more patience or more stimulus coming through.
Yeah, fixed asset investment came in also a miss, 3.7%. The jobless rate, though, is at 5%, so that has actually ticked lower. Property investment, though, continues to be in the doldrums, right? We're talking about a 10.7% contraction there, and residential property sales also falling some 2.8%. So basically, as you mentioned, retail sales, the standout, everything else was a miss.
Yeah, there we go. Let's bring in Jacqueline Rong, Chief China Economist at BNP Paribas, joining us right now to talk us through this. Jacqueline, why don't we start with the retail sales number, 6.4%? That seems to be the standout so far. What do you suspect was behind this big pop in that specific metric?
Well, I think the retail sales growth got a boost from the extension of the 618 online shopping festival, because in past years that this shopping festival mostly happens in the month of June, but this year it happens earlier. So at least the retail sales in second half of May actually received a boost from this shopping festival. I think we saw the similar story playing out in October last year, because that year that the retail sales growth also picked up quite notably, also because the Double 11 shopping festival was extended into second half of October. But we think that effect is going to weigh in June, and retail sales growth is likely to fall back this month.
Okay, maybe not sustainable, but Jacqueline, it's interesting, right? When we talk about the consumer sector, there's so many interesting new sectors within the sectors now, right? I talk about Labubus, like Pop Mart. I take a look at Laopu Gold, where you're seeing these emotional consumption as a theme. How supportive do you think those kind of subsectors are for the overall recovery of the consumer?
I would say, despite the quite downbeat overall picture of consumption and China's macro economy, there are some bright spots. As you just mentioned, that we have seen a like consumption downgrade story, that people started to buy less practical goods like luxury goods, and they started to buy something that make them feel emotionally happy, like more toys and more Labubu. So these are some bright spots in subsectors, but as an economist, if we take a look at the overall picture of consumption, we think it's still quite downbeat, especially relative to the run rate we saw before the pandemic.
Right. Jacqueline, just to